I wanted to just start by talking about making the case for green schools. So that's why we're here today, specifically focusing in on Amber Trails Community School, which is a project we completed just over 5 years ago now. And it was the first, and I believe still currently only, school in Manitoba to be certified LEED Platinum. I know it's a bit strange to start with health and well-being when we're, as I say, staring down the barrel of climate and energy crisis. But I think we're missing a huge part of the conversation if we don't acknowledge that human health and well-being are inextricably linked to the environment. And I think given the current context that we have with the pandemic and increasing inequity around the world, it's all the more pertinent. So energy targets and performance metrics, of course, are vital, but we also need to focus on, as I said, health and well-being. And so when we're making this case for the value of green schools, we really have to recognize the social determinants of health. So the graphic on the right is from the US, I think from the CDC, but the 14 themes on the left-hand side, these are all from the Canadian Public Health Association. And if we really start to look at all of these, you can see that a majority, and actually, if not all of them, are quite interrelated to the planning and the design of schools. So certainly education, early childhood development, but even into employment and working conditions, topics of food security and insecurity, social exclusion and having a social safety network, and of course, gender, race, disability, Aboriginal status, all of these pieces really come into play. I do want to say that very early on, the school division decided that the school would be heated and cooled by geothermal, like a ground source heat pump. But there was a really conscious effort to eliminate dependence on fossil fuels. And so the school made the choice not to bring any natural gas service to the building to eliminate any future greenhouse gas emissions. And that was really quite key in this design. So there's a ground source heat pump, as I mentioned, that brings for heating to a radiant floor system. For cooling and ventilation, there are active chilled beams in the ceiling space. And then of course, all of the contributing parts of high performance triple pane glazing and air exhaust. But I did want to just point out that according to the Pan-Canadian Framework on Clean Growth and Climate Change, they actually last year said that construction costs for net zero energy buildings had dropped by 40% in the past decade and are continuing to fall. So I don't know what the pandemic did to that, but it actually starts to become a more realistic future for projects in general, but I think also schools, and we need to start thinking about that. And finally, planting the seed, quite literally planting the seed in looking at this picture, but part of the path to LEED certification for the school included a public teaching document that wove the school's green design features and initiatives into the daily instruction to students and the learning activities. So it was an actual curricular document that explored a lot of different disciplines at all grade levels at the school. And it was really important because it's enabled students to interact with the school facility in ways that they've said have raised their awareness of energy conservation and resource consumption, waste generation, and then the influence of the microclimate on building systems and human comfort.
So when you're starting to think about how do you build it's a brand new school in a brand new neighborhood, and this question of identity, where do we come from? What is the culture of this school going to be? I really felt that from the very start that this school, because of its actual structure in the building, was the place where that idea of sustainability and taking care of the environment and the school as a teaching tool was just embedded right into the culture of the building. And I know through Prairie and the work of working towards that LEED Platinum status, there was intentional things done along the way. But you build a culture in a school, in leadership, in staffing, in the decisions you make to say, this is a new way of being and doing. So, so often in the school, we would often use the line, we're the greenest school in Canada. We're a sustainable school. We should be doing things differently. But this notion of transparency where you can actually see into everyone's classrooms, and that design, whether it was intended or not, changed teaching practice. It actually made people be able to look into each other's classrooms so much more easily. And people would say, what's going on in there? Look at what they're doing. And some of that natural collaboration that you're looking for in teachers' practice could happen because of that design. So along with light, there was also this sense of transparency in practice and people really doing more collaboration than I've ever seen in other schools that I've worked in. Beautiful. You know, you've got features in the building that are actual teaching tools. So kids can actually engage with the geothermal flooring and the, you know, the construction of the walls. There was a whole project that took place in the school where there was labeling and descriptions of things that children would be seeing and understanding what they were seeing. So as Lindsay spoke about the collection of rainwater and that how that's used, the gray water is used in the toilets, like there was in every single toilet in the school, there was like a little handmade student card explaining, like, you might see that this water doesn't look crystal clear and here's the reason why. So when you're sitting there doing your business, you're getting an education. And those little kind of teaching tools were all over the building to remind our students that this building like has its sort of its own curriculum, as so to speak. You know, we started the first walking school bus within the neighborhood, and that walking school bus then changed and it became a culture of walk, bike, roll. And we saw just an incredible number of students, not only walking to school, but using their scooters and their bikes to get to work. And this bike cage was like testament to that, like just the number of kids coming every day on their bikes rather than being dropped off by car.
So when you're a high performance athlete, you are trying things that are hard. And so you really notice the subtleties and the details in your environment. So if your training environment, if the air, if the air is a little bit different, so on the bottom is a picture of the soccer players in Beijing because of the air quality, they had to delay games and things like that. Similarly, it's not people who are trying something hard cognitively. So think students learning new stuff, they're more sensitive to their environmental factors. And I'll show you some of the research behind this. So here what you're seeing is the first thing I mentioned about physiological effects. So, kids for their size, they process more air, they're breathing, they're both breathing or processing more air relative to their body size. They're also developing. So what you're seeing is the curve, basically a proxy for your lung development. And when you're in school, you're at the age where you're still developing. And this means that there's both immediate physiological effects of the air they're breathing inside the classroom and also long-term effects. And so there's studies looking at respiratory disease in particular, but also asthmas and allergies. So the air inside the school, and this is just about lung development, but more generally, they're developing, and so they're more sensitive. And then it's not just health effects. There's a large body of research that links specific building design operation attributes with productivity. So this means that, wherever you're doing your office work, your building is impacting you. And where the kids are doing their cognitive loads, where they're doing their thinking and learning, the environment is impacting them. And especially when they're doing work that is new to them. So one hypothesis is that when humans do things that are just like take a little bit more effort, so not the kinds of things you can just do, on autopilot, not those kinds of tasks, but tasks that require you to focus, that we're not as able to cope with environmental effects in that situation. So those effects might be noise or light or air quality. So putting all this into one kind of takeaway is that there's this potential for lifelong consequences, both from, say, missing time in class because you get sick, or you get 1% or 5% lower on a test that then meant a difference on getting into something, which means the difference, like think the cascade effect of like downstream, what it could mean for you for your whole life if you're in a classroom that's not enabling you to do your best.
These are the official sort of statements from ASHRAE. ASHRAE is the sort of like North American Technical Society for Mechanical Engineers working with building systems. And they're the folks who develop things like our ventilation standards that we use here for schools. In the COVID pandemic, we think that airborne transmission of SARS-CoV-2, the virus that causes COVID-19, is significant and should be controlled, and that ventilation and filtration provided by HVAC systems can reduce the concentration, the airborne concentration of the virus, and the risk of transmission through the air. So the things that we're doing when we design, when we build, and when we operate our ventilation systems, even though we're not really designing schools for infection control, a classroom's never going to be an operating room, the choices that we make do affect our exposure and potential risks, even though that's not sort of how we're always thinking about it. Now, in case of kind of new challenges, our understanding of the risks is always developing. But I think part of the guidance from ASHRAE, and they have sort of hundreds of pages of detailed technical information for those who want, and I've got a link at the end. We can act now based on established best practices, and we can look at experience with other illnesses to kind of, have these kind of many points of intersection into what we ought to be doing in schools. And I think partly too, talking about when we're investing in quality schools, when we're investing in green buildings, the reality is that some HVAC systems, some schools are going to be in a better position to meet the guidance for the pandemic than others. We've got some schools that are maybe 50 years old, have that sort of bunker design with no operable windows that Lorelei talked about, and some then that have, like Amber Trails, that have excellent ventilation, operable windows in every classroom, and those are just in a different position to meet our current challenges. So ASHRAE has some specific guidance for the reopening of schools in particular, and they cover a lot of stuff, which is important. There's really like good checklist level stuff there for folks who are managing schools or reopening schools in this time. The recommendation for during the pandemic is, if your system can handle it, to upgrade to MERV 13 filters. There's sort of high efficiency filters above the minimum. And that's sort of the same level of filtration we would do in sort of premium office spaces, or maybe not like a hospital operating room kind of thing, but MERV 13 or MERV 14 filters would be kind of entry-level clinical healthcare spaces as well. So I've got a couple of links here to some of the related resources. So the first is the ASHRAE School Reopening Guidelines. There's a lot of stuff there. They also have a one-pager summary if you want something kind of short to hand off to somebody. There's a link there on the Lancet COVID-19 Commission. They have a paper about designing infectious disease resilience into schools through ventilation and air filtration. And there's a lot of really smart people who contributed to that. It's a great document.